Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to another episode of Command Power, the show where we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we've got a whole new fresh batch of Dominaria United spoilers for you, so without further ado, let's dive right in. And we're starting off with the strongest of the bunch today, which is Serra Paragon. For 2 colorless and 2 white, we have a creature, angel, 3/4 flying. Once during each of your turns, you may play a land from your graveyard or cast a permanent spell with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard. If you do, it gains when this permanent is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, exile it, and you gain 2 life. Wow, this is really strong. So it's basically a Lurrus-like effect that can also hit lands. That's already great. But it can also hit creatures with mana value 3 or less, which is better than Lurrus could. Lurrus could only hit 2 or less. And Lurrus was a card that was basically either too strong or banned in many different formats. So this has a lot of potential. It's a little bit more expensive at 4 mana, but it has a much better body as a 3/4 flying, which is really nice. There's a little bit of downside as well. They've tried to play it a little bit safe by exiling your cards after they come back into play, so you can't keep reusing the same card, but that's a really minor thing. This is an incredibly strong card, and it should be a staple in all sorts of commander decks and in standard, so expect for this one to be very expensive. Next up we have Hortigen. For 1 colorless and 2 blue, we have a creature Djinn with flying and 4 toughness, and its power is equal to the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard. And then instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less. This is really good in a lot of different decks. It's very good in any sort of spellslinger deck. Seeing as getting a Goblin Electromancer effect on your threat is really good. Late game, this is going to be a very big card. It's going to be able to swing in for a lot of damage, and in the meantime, it's going to let you storm off and play a lot of cheap spells. This has potential across multiple different formats. 3 mana is a little bit expensive maybe for what the card does, but the 4 toughness kind of makes up for it. I think this is a pretty strong card. Next up we have Defiler of Flesh, which is our 4th entry in the Defiler cycle. Right now we're only missing the red one. It's a creature Phyrexian Horror, 4/4 with Menace. I love the art on this, by the way, it's super sick. As an additional cost to cast black permanent spells, you may pay 2 life. Those spells cost black less to cast. If you play life this way, this effect reduces only the amount of black mana you pay. Whenever you cast a black permanent spell, target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains menace until end of turn. Okay, so this is strong, just like all the other ones in the cycle. 4 mana 4/4 with menace is okay, though the body is a little bit worse maybe, again, than the green or the blue one, but slightly better than the white one, I would say, for the cost. However, the triggered ability is also kind of weak, like the white one. It's very good if you're in an aggressive, low-to-the-ground black deck, but there's not that many of those around. It'd be really good in my Stompy Crick black deck, so it's probably going to go right in there. But the trigger feels like it's just not doing that much. Giving a creature you control +1/+1 and menace is okay, but it's just nowhere near as good as giving your whole board +1/+1 permanently or drawing a card. So it'll still see play because it's a good card, but just not quite as good as the other ones in the cycle. Next up we have Rona, Shieldreds, Faithful. For 1 colorless, 1 blue, and 2 black, we have a legendary creature, Human Wizard. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, each opponent loses 1 life. So another Magecraft ability. You may cast Rona, Shieldreds, Faithful from your graveyard by discarding 2 cards in addition to paying its other costs. That ability is not super relevant in EDH if she's your commander, although I suppose it lets you cheat the command tax, but you do have to discard 2 cards, which is a bit awkward. That being said, the first ability is quite good. Being able to drain people every time you cast an instant or sorcery spell is pretty good. The body as a 3/4 is not awful. This seems like it's got decent potential, and if you can find a way to cast infinite spells, such as with Isochron, Scepter, and Dramatic Reversal, then this can just become a win con that is always accessible from your command zone. So that seems actually quite strong, and I'm sure some people will try to do degenerate stuff like that with it. Next up we have Quirion Beastcaller. For 1 colorless and 1 green, we have a creature Dryad Warrior. Whenever you cast a creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Quirion Beastcaller. When Quirion Beastcaller dies, distribute X +1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures you control, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Quirion Beastcaller. So this is going to grow really big, and then when it dies, it's going to distribute all those counters on your board. That's fine. It starts off as a 2/2 as well, which is not awful. That's decent, but that being said, you want to be in some kind of proliferate deck or something for this to be really nuts. And the fact that it's only going to happen once when it dies makes it a little bit less good than it could otherwise be. Overall, seems like a slightly weak card. Next up we have Cleaving Skyrider. For 2 colorless and 1 white, it's a creature human warrior, a 2/2 flash flying, and it has kicker for 2 colorless and 1 red. That's a very expensive kicker because it doubles the cost of the card. But when it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, it deals X damage to any target, where X is the number of attacking creatures. Now, why have I put this in the spoiler? Why is this good enough for Commander? Well, I feel this could be either a good finisher in your own Boros deck if you're going wide, because you can suddenly be dealing 10-20 damage to somebody's face out of nowhere, or it could also be a really good card just as a defensive option, because people do have go wide strategies quite often, and you can play this on an opponent's turn, and maybe they're attacking with 15 creatures or something, and then suddenly you can snipe someone in the face for 15. At that point, it might well be game over. So this card seems like it might actually have a little bit of potential. Obviously it's on the weaker side and it needs a specific meta, but if your meta is full of go wide decks, then this card might actually make the cut. Next up is Anointed Peacekeeper. 2 colorless and white, 3/3 human cleric with vigilance. As Anointed Peacekeeper enters the battlefield, look at an opponent's hand, then choose any card name. Spells your opponents cast with the chosen name cost 2 more to cast. Activated abilities of sources with the chosen name cost 2 more to activate unless they're mana abilities. Okay, it's a little bit narrow, but it is a really annoying kind of hate bet because it's guaranteed to hit. It's going to come into play and you're going to be able to look at an opponent's hand and then tax the best card in that hand, so it costs 2 more to play. As we've seen before with Elite Spellbinder, that is actually a pretty good effect, and this basically guarantees that you're going to hit, just like that other card does too. So it's kind of similar to that in a sense, and it's a 3/3 vigilance, which has got a good body. It also can do a pithing needle kind of effect. If you need to affect something that's already on the board, you can just use the enter the battlefield trigger as information to look at their hand, but then name something that's already in play, so they have to pay more to use the activated abilities. So very flexible card, and this should see play in quite a few different decks, I feel. Next up we have Drag Below. For 2 colorless and 2 black, it's a sorcery with domain. Each creature gets -X until end of turn, where X is 1 plus the number of basic land types among lands you control. The fact that you can do it with domain equals just 1 and it'll still -2/-2 makes this a little bit better than it would otherwise be, because you can actually go up to -6/-6 in a dedicated domain deck, and even in a 2 or 3 color deck it can be -3/-3 or -4/-4. That's not awful. Paying 4 mana for a -4/-4 is pretty decent, and it's what a mutilate would be on turn 4 in a mono black deck. So it's actually, I think, a decent card, but Domain is just a really awkward ability in Commander because it just restricts kind of what decks the cards can go into. You need to put them into very heavy multicolored decks, and they have to be decks that have a lot of basic land types as well, which means you're probably having to pay a very expensive land base. So I feel like these Domain cards are a little bit weaker than the effect actually suggests, so I'm going to say this is probably not going to see that much play. Next up we have Ivy Gleeful Spell Thief. For 1 green and 1 blue, it's a legendary creature, fairy rogue, 2/1 flying. Whenever a player casts a spell that targets only a single creature other than Ivy Gleeful Spell Thief, you may copy that spell. The copy targets Ivy, and then it has a reminder text: a copy of an aura spell becomes a token. So this also works with auras. This is really sweet. You can pile your deck full of auras, slap them onto your other creatures, and then copy them and put them onto Ivy too, which means you're mitigating the risk. That's really nice. You can also do it with instants or sorceries and stuff that cantrips, so there's a lot of flexibility there. But what's really cool is you can do it on stuff your opponents do. So if your opponent is playing any sort of Voltron deck, they're going to have a difficult time because they're going to want to put stuff on their creatures, but then when they do, you're going to be getting copies of that. So that's kind of awkward. Not only Voltron decks though, there's a lot of cards that target creatures, and these players might not want to play them when Ivy is out. I think she's a really cool one, and it should be pretty fun to build her out. It's a Voltron build, but it's quite an unusual one that we haven't really seen before. Next up we have Silver Scrutiny. For X colorless and 2 blue, it's a sorcery. You may cast Silver Scrutiny as though it had flash if X is 3 or less. Draw 3 cards. Okay, so not much to say here. It's kind of flexible. You can play it for 5 mana and then draw 3 cards at instant speed, or you can play it for 4 mana or 3 mana, although you probably want to play it at least for 4 or 5 before it really gets worth it. And then if you dump more mana into it, you can't really do it at instant speed. You can do it at sorcery speed. This is fine. I think there's a lot better ways to draw cards in EDH, so probably not going to see much play. Next up we have Danitha, Benalia's Hope. For 4 colorless and 1 white, it's a 4/4 legendary creature, human knight. She has first strike, vigilance, lifelink, and when she enters the battlefield, you may put an aura or an equipment card from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield attached to Danitha. So yeah, there's lots of stuff you can cheat in with this. Argentum Armor is going to let you cheat 12 mana. Eldrazi Conscription is going to let you cheat 8. You can go absolutely nuts. And obviously, you don't want to be blinking it too much if you're putting auras on her, but you can still blink it if you're putting equipments on, and then just put those equipments onto something else, or re-equip if you have any card that lets you equip for cheap or free. So this is going to let you cheat a bunch of mana, and she seems really, really strong. Also, the fact that she comes in with first strike, vigilance, and lifelink right off the bat is already pretty good. Next up we have King Darian the 48th. I had to just Google my Roman numerals because I kind of forgot what L was. And for 1 colorless, 1 green, and 1 white, he's a legendary creature, human soldier, 2/3. Other creatures you control get +1/+1. And then for 3 colorless, 1 green and 1 white, you put a +1/+1 on him and create a 1/1 white soldier creature token, which of course is going to be a 2/2 white soldier creature token. And then sacrifice King Darian. Creatures tokens you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. It's a lot of abilities tacked on 1 card, and he's very cheap, but the activated ability is a little bit expensive. That being said, though, it's just a Selesnya tokens card. There's just so many of these commanders already. I don't know why Selesnya and Boros commanders always seem to be so samey. Strong, but uninteresting. And that was our last card for today, so if you have any comments, please let me know in the comments section below. I read them all and respond to them all. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like and or subscribe. It really helps the channel and I really appreciate it. And until next time, take care.